Okay, thank you very much for joining us today. My name is Catherine Clinch, and this is the Creative Masterclass for Digital Hollywood Fall 2018. Thank you all for joining us. I think you're going to have a good time today. It's a really good panel. So first of all, we're going to start with Goya Robles. Goya is a lifetime member of the Actors Studio, which I think is one of the coolest things an actor can say. He was previously featured in the film 1155, and he currently plays the role of Iago in Get Shorty on Epix. Dwayne Johnson Cochran produced the television movie Whitewater and the one-woman show 45 Jokes About My Dead Dad. He wrote for the series Angel Street, co-created and wrote for the series Minor Adjustments, and his series pilot was just picked up by HBO in Turnaround. And he sold a script to Steven Spielberg, which how many people wish they could say that? Don Hanfield was the creator, executive producer, and writer on the History Channel series Nightfall. He wrote and produced Throwaways, which I have a background in hackathons, and this is the first movie that actually was good about hackers. He produced The Founder. He will be producing the remake of The Housemaid. He created and wrote the graphic novel Rift, and his recent comic book, The Mole, was just optioned for a TV series by Ivan Reitman's Montecito Pictures. His next project is the film, Switched On, a memoir of brain change and emotional awakening. Lydia Porto. Lydia has appeared in a number of films, including Scary Movie 5 and Horrible Bosses 2. In Get Shorty, she plays Amara, the villainous drug dealer who decides to mix business with romance, and she has just directed her first short film. Adam Arkin. Adam is the executive producer and director of Get Shorty. Prior to that, he performed the same duties on Secrets and Lies. He's directed episodes of Secession, Billions, Sneaky Pete, and Masters of Sex. Adams also directed episodes of Longmire, Modern Family, Fargo, How to Get Away with Murder, Justified, Santa Clarita Diet, Nurse Jackie, The Bridge, The Blacklist, and The Americans. Wait, like the infomercial, but that's not all. Adams' acting credits include Chicago Hope, The West Wing, Halloween H20, Hitch, A Serious Man, State of Affairs, Sons of Anarchy, The Newsroom, 8 Simple Rules, and Northern Exposure, demonstrating he is definitely a slacker and, an underachiever.
And if you act now, you can get this travel fishing rod, too.
And then who am I? I am a former television writer who wrote for Knight Rider, Hunter, Jake and the Fat Man, Love Boat, Heart to Heart, and many other TV shows that were on when most of you weren't born yet. Those are vintage credits, so I've used a vintage photo of me. While I was a stay-at-home mom with 3 sons, my placeholder job was associate publisher of creative screenwriting, and I did the first 5 years of Screenwriting Expo. After that, I invented Clixit, a mobile platform for professionally created content that will actually use Screen Actors Guild and Writers Guild members for it. Recently, I wrote the comic book and created the world for a backdoor pilot for Stan Lee's POW Entertainment. So, I want to start off with a really basic question that a lot of people in the audience want to hear. How did you all get your start?
Wow.
Anyone jump in.
Let's see. I was working at public broadcasting in Chicago. I wrote a screenplay, and I sent it to CAA in the mail, and they replied. I was surprised. That's how I started.
I grew up around the business and knew very early on it's what I wanted to do. I started taking acting classes in New York when I was a kid. I started working when I was in my middle teens. Got booked on a couple of commercials and was doing stage work in New York, and took the money I made from a Dentine commercial and came out to California, having landed an agent in New York, and just started working from then on. It's all I've ever done. Yeah.
Lydia?
I knew that I liked the business and I wanted to be an actor from when I was a teenager, but my parents didn't agree. So I studied literature, foreign languages and international affairs, and I worked in the hotel business for a few years and started taking acting classes. The security guard at my hotel where I got my first job after college ended up being one of the theater professors that had been fired from my college. So I had like an intensive theater training. And my first job in television was for KCT here in Los Angeles doing corporate underwriting. And then I lived in Texas for a long time, so I did producing, directing, a lot of different things like that in a smaller market, and moved here to focus on acting about 5 years ago. So I think I've had several starts, it seems to me.
I just want the rights to the security guard who taught you how to act, because that's my next movie. That's amazing.
Okay.
That sounds so cool. I started as an actor in college and did some local stuff. I went to Ohio State and did like chili commercials and Sunny Delight commercials and stuff like that. Then came to California, was working as an actor and also writing screenplays part-time, and kind of decided that I needed to just take one or the other seriously, and got a job in production. I worked at Entertainment Television. I was a producer there, and then started writing screenplays and getting paid to do that, and it kind of moved me into producing and writing.
I like this girl, and
That's the best
that's what it was.
That's really what it's
That's what it was. This girl, she
Good way
was
to
in a play, and I went to check her out, and she was good. The play was good, and I went 2 other times, and it was different every time, and I was so fascinated by that. So, and by this time, I had graduated undergrad with a degree in music. I wasn't really doing much with it. So I hit up my boy. I was like, I think I want to do this acting thing. And I got an audition for the Actors Studio Drama School. And yeah, we rehearsed for 2 weeks, and I got in. And that's how it all started.
So you may have noticed that there's a disproportionately large percentage of people from the show get Shorty. That's not a mistake. I think this is one of the best shows I've seen on TV in like ages, and it is hands down the best show about Hollywood that has ever been done. So Adam, how did Get Shorty come together? Did you and Davey Holmes know each other before the show? Who set that up?
Davey and I did not know each other before this. My understanding is that Davey was approached by MGM and Epix with them wanting to retool the film, the material that was the genesis of the film, and turn it into a series. And Davey and MGM approached Alan Coulter to direct what would have been the pilot episode, except for the fact that they had already committed to a full series. But the first episode was directed by Alan. Alan and I are represented by the same agent, and as a result of Alan's participation in the project, my agent knew that they were looking for a producing director as well, because Alan was not going to be staying on with the project. And I had worked for MGM recently, so it all kind of came together, and they arranged a meeting for Davey and I to talk about the project, and he and I kind of hit it off, and that's where my involvement with the project started.
So it's kind of like an arranged marriage kind of a thing, as
Yes.
opposed to a generic, hey, we've got this friendship and let's move it. Have you had that experience before?
I have, but not in ways that I have felt were as successful as this. I'd done the job a couple of times before on two other projects, The Americans and Secrets and Lies. And while I really enjoyed the creative aspect of the position, it's very defined. It's a position that's completely defined by the showrunner. And I knew enough going into my meeting with Davey that I was able to articulate what my concerns were and what I wanted the relationship to be if it were to happen. I felt I had nothing to lose in just being honest about that. And to my delight, he said, that's exactly what I'm wanting and looking for. And he's been true to his word in that respect, in that he's really allowed me to feel like I'm in a partnership, fully understanding he's the boss, but wanting what I bring to the table, and it's always made me feel that way.
And at what point did you know you had a hit?
I knew very early on that we were making a show that we could be proud of, very early on. I think in the first few days of the filming of the first episode, I was aware that we were on to something special. I associate hits with vast numbers of people watching, and I would still like for more people to be aware of Epix and how to get that platform in their homes. But critically, and the people that have been watching seem to be echoing the idea that we're doing something right.
Don, how did Nightfall come together?
My writing partner and I were driving back we had just finished work on a feature film, and we'd finished, I think we wrote the pilot for The Rift, and then we were driving back, and I just, the producer in me is always like, well, what's sort of missing from television? I'm always a big history geek, and I just asked him, like, what do you know about the Knights Templar? And we just started talking about that, and we actually wrote it on spec, and I sent it to my agent at the time, and he said, I love this script, but why'd you write it? I'll never be able to sell it. It's a deep period. It's about knights in armor. We just wrote it on spec. It was something that we were attracted to and wanted to create, and we were always big fans of like Arthurian dramas and Excalibur and stuff like that, and wanted to do something historically grounded that kind of tapped into that story. So
that's the second thing you've shot in the Czech Republic. What is that like, and is it?
It was the first thing in Czech Republic. I shot Throwaways in Bulgaria. So Prague was great. The experience of making, that was my first TV show, and you're sort of dealing with a lot of things I wasn't expecting maybe politically, but the experience of seeing a set built based on your words is pretty amazing. And it was a huge backlot. It was like medieval Disneyland. It burned down like when we were shooting episode 3, so we had to rebuild it and stuff, so there was challenges there, but it's great. It's hard I have 2 little kids, so it was harder to be, I told my writing partner now everything is like exterior United States Day, and not medieval or foreign, but it's certainly wonderful to live in a foreign country for months at a time, to be good to know the country. So.
Dwayne, Heist 88 was developed at FX, and then it went into turnaround, and it just got picked up by HBO. Can you walk us through the process you went through there?
Well, with Heist 88, this is a story that I was a reporter in Chicago many years ago, and working. The story is about 4 young African American men who worked at a bank in Chicago, the First National Bank of Chicago, and they wound up over a period of 30 days stealing $80 million, and they got away with it. And I thought, great news story. How could that be a series? And I pitched it around town, and we got offers from HBO, FX, and Amazon. And we went with FX because the people on our team had done some projects with them. Courtney Vance, the star of the show, just got an Emmy for the OJ series. So we decided to go with them, but it didn't quite work genre-wise with them. I think a heist show, I think what FX does well is they kind of cross genres a lot. And they will have, like, The Americans is both a spy show and a family drama, and it's pretty bloody. Ours was clearly a heist show, which had a lot of character, but I think FX didn't quite understand the deep genre I was trying to push. And HBO already told us that they liked it, and we turned them down. So the day it went into turnaround, HBO called and said, "Can we have it?" And it was the next day. They liked the pilot, and so now we're working with them.
So how did that differ from having a script go into turnaround with someone like Steven Spielberg? Because everybody in this room wants to know step by step what that was like.
Well, you know, it's all about getting those things made, right? But you know, I wrote a movie about Chicago. I'm from Chicago in the late '60s, early '70s, and Steven Spielberg read the screenplay and called me and said he wanted to buy it. And I was shocked. You know, he called me up and said he wanted to buy it. Can you come over to DreamWorks? He said, when I got there, he said, this story reminds me of my family in Arizona when I was growing up, and it moved me. And I said, this is great. I'm really happy. And then 2 years later, we're still talking about it, you know. Development is development. You develop things, it takes a long time. Then you have to find the right director and the right team. And then there's interest that is really big at the beginning of a sell, and then it goes away sometime. So you have to have certain people around it to keep the energy going. And then finally, the energy kind of ran away for whatever reason. Steven's like, I'm not going to make the film. I said, okay, great. So what do I do? So he likes to keep all of his projects. That's his, I mean, every corporation, that's part of their intellectual properties, all the projects they have. So this was, I said, a true story and about a family in Chicago, and I'd like to know, is there a way I can get it back? And it took a lot of letter writing, a lot of talking, a lot of cajoling for him to finally say, yeah. But it wasn't easy. It took about 2 years of him wanting to keep it. And they went to Paramount at the time, and they left a few projects at Paramount, and that one was left there, so I got it back.
Yeah, I once sold a portion of my life rights to ABC for a movie of the week, and I found that to get it back, each year it gets more and more expensive, and it is now currently worth much more than anything else in my life.
Oh yeah, they put interest on every single day a project is staying at a studio. So if they paid you $300,000 to get it back, it's going to be about $1.5 million because it's compound interest every day of every person who worked on the project, and it's a lot of money. And you have to negotiate to get that down a bit.
So Lydia, while all this is going on, and all these guys are making all these decisions and going through that process, what are the actors doing?
Waiting for the phone to ring. We're in class, we're preparing, we're auditioning for a lot of different projects. I also have always done other things besides acting, so speaking only for myself, I do have a good team, and they do keep me busy, and I've been working since we stopped shooting Get Shorty, and I'm headed to New York to work on another show. But when I have downtime, I write. I've produced a short based on a structure that I saw here. I produced a short of a web series that I wrote a few years ago, and I explore whether it's stand-up comedy or comedic writing or improv, you know, different aspects of performance that I like to explore and that I might add to ways that I express myself. I know sometimes we go to classes or just train, you know, keep fit, things like that, read. I feel like anything that you experience helps you as an actor because that's what you draw from to create any character. I like to travel. I'm planning a long trip at the end of the year. I don't know what other actors do, but I kind of live my life as fully as possible, and then that way I have a nice, rich bucket of things to draw from when I am asked to audition for things.
Yeah.
So Goya, I want to talk to you about the process of acting. You and Lydia are two of the nicest people in this city. And you play two of the sickest villains I have ever seen on screen, and yet liked. So what's that process, both with your own development of your character, and then how's the dynamic of working together on some of those scenes? There was a brutal scene in this past season where you were disowned.
Yeah.
I wanted to cry for you at that moment. So talk about that, please.
Well, I mean, Me as Goya, I have a very specific way of dealing with myself. I like to go internal. So as an artist, I do a lot of writing. I dance. There's certain things that I do that are for me. When I'm dealing with a situation, I'm usually doing a lot of internal processing. So in order to play a character like Yago, or any character really, that's so outside of how I normally engage myself, there's certain practices that I do. Like for example, and one of the things I've talked about before is I do animal work, which is the study of a particular animal and its habitat. So I'll look at a character and depending on the sense I get from it, for example, for Yago, I studied a spotted hyena. And it's a matriarchal structure within that, the way that they operate. And so I studied everything. I studied how they act when there's prey around, or when they're the one that's being threatened, or how they are with the young, and things like that. And it's stuff like that that'll get me in my body in a completely different way than Goya would. And so that's just one aspect, you know, of how I create a character so that I can connect to impulses that normally I would just keep to myself. And I think working with Lydia, I mean, from the first moment we saw each other, I remember literally the first time we met each other. I'll go up to her, I'm like, Tia, which means aunt in Spanish. And it's just been kind of a flow, you know? Like, I think we've always, from the first moment we met, we've just had good chemistry with each other. We had a trust that we had with each other. And I'll just say, just on the show in general, it's been like that. There's just been a flow, not just with the actors, but with the directors, with the writers. You know, I feel like he's an actor's director, because he comes from an acting background, so he knows exactly what to tell me, or the other actors, to get them started and to think quickly and differently. So, yeah.
So Adam, how much of your directing is influenced by your experience as an actor?
It kind of begins and ends with that for me, I think. But I mean, to answer that, I'd also have to say that my acting was, as an actor, I was interested in more than just the structure of what it was I was being asked to do as an actor. I'm interested in storytelling as a whole, and was interested in the roles I was playing in terms of how they fit into the story. And I think as a result of that approach, it kind of led me to directing. So they were always sort of linked, I think, in my mind. But I find that my approach to directing is very interested often in a point of view, and that point of view is usually one of the characters in the story. And I'm sure that is an approach that was informed by my own acting background. But I think it's helpful in terms of having a kind of specific approach to the storytelling, to know whose perspective you want to be favoring. On occasion, it'll slip into a more general narrative point of view, but more often than not, I think that my initial choices are informed by figuring out whose eyes is the story being seen through.
What's the dynamic difference between directing a show that you're producing and just directing a show that you've been brought on for X amount of episodes?
I think a level of familiarity with not only the long arc of the story on a show that you're also a producer on, but a comfort level and a shorthand with the cast and the crew, and it lends itself to kind of digging deeper a little bit, and also being involved in sort of defining the tone in a slightly more involved way. In that partnership with the showrunner, I think as a producing director, you're sort of encouraged to nudge the show into various areas of evolution that as a guest director, you're a little more hard-pressed to do that. I don't know how welcome it would be often. I find as a guest director, and I still do a lot of guest directing, it's sort of my job to take the temperature of the show, the politics of a given show, and the likes and dislikes of a showrunner, and try to figure out how to integrate yourself into that culture.
And now, because you wear 3 hats, when you're acting on a show that you're not directing and you're not producing, what kind of conversation differential does that make you have? Or do you have the same kind of conversation?
If anything, I find it's led me to have less conversation as an
Really?
actor. Yeah, I just it's rare that I act nowadays, and when I do, I find that I really relish the idea of being able to sort of stay in my specialized realm a little bit and not worry about the big picture quite as much. And I also find that I like problem solving, and instead of trying to figure out a way to fit in with what I had been thinking in my approach as an actor, to just listen to what's being asked of me and try to figure out a creative way of just doing that. There's something kind of liberating about that, actually.
Don, I'd like you to talk about your project Switched On, because you've put together a powerhouse team of people who are working on this project. And it has a very interesting subject that most people don't look at as this could be a very big, important movie.
Yeah, it's the true story of a gentleman named John Elder Robeson who was diagnosed with Asperger's, and he got into a medical experiment that made him feel emotion for the first time. And it's sort of his story of how he sort of received the emotion and how it changed his life and his family. It reminded me of Flowers for Algernon or Charlie, or one of those from which I thought was a beautiful film. And I'm doing it with Focus, and I did Kill the Messenger with them, and I sent them this book and they liked it. So Mark Platt just signed on, and Sam Gold, who's an Emmy-winning theater director, signed on to direct, and Emma Frost, who is behind White Queen and White Princess, adapted the book, did an excellent job, and we're actually meeting on it in New York next week. But yeah, it's just I thought it was an important topic, and it's really kind of interesting, and she wrote a great script.
So in general, and I'd like you to start, Dwayne, what attracts you to a project? What's that first thing where you go, there's something here?
I think story and relationship, and like what's the bigger message behind it? Like when I was being serious when she talked about the security guard who was a theater teacher who has I was in a cab with I was taking a yellow cab at the airport, and this gentleman was telling me that he was also a bus driver, and apparently in the inner city, sometimes they don't send a whole bus there, they'll just send a yellow cab, and the yellow cab will pick up 3 students and take them to school every day. And he was like a elderly African-American gentleman. He was talking about how he had in his car a Crip and a Blood that he had to drive to school every day, and how he, over the course of the year, was able to get to know them in a sense that he kind of changed and mentored them. And I was like, well, that's a cool story. I would watch that. I would watch that story. So it's anything. I'm doing a movie right now about the story of the president of Somalia, how he became the president of Somalia. I heard on KCRW, he was a Somali-American guy who was working at the Department of Transportation in New York. He was doing stuff, local fundraising. He met the president of Somalia, who said he was hiring people, and he gave him his resume, and they made him the prime minister of Somalia. So we went from a cubicle Department of Transportation to 19 bodyguards in the streets of Mogadishu, and all this. It's just, his journey is just it's incredible. You couldn't make it up journey, but it's really, thematically, it's about democracy. It's about, sort of an American and democracy and trying to, terraform a country that he remembers from his youth was called the Pearl of the Indian Ocean. And Americans don't know that Somalia was the Pearl of the Indian Ocean. It was like this amazing tourist destination. We just see it as this sort of war-torn land. So something like that that's sort of historically significant and interesting, but a great character journey. It just depends. I mean, I'm attracted to all genres. It's just really about kind of finding a story that I feel like is worth 5 or 6 years of your life. I mean, it's going to take that much time to produce something, so it's got to be something important.
Well, what I'll look for is that story that starts out exterior United States.
Exactly. Now, well, I got Somalia. I'm doing a series that's set in Istanbul. I just scouted Istanbul, so I'm working my way. I have a pilot shooting this fall in Atlanta that actually was optioned by Steven Spielberg, so I can't talk about it, but it's something that I'm excited about. That maybe will keep me in the States if it goes further.
2 out of 6, and I'm one of the not 2. Okay, Dwayne, what attracts you to a project?
Mostly a project that kind of tilts stereotypes upside down. I do a lot of teaching also for UNESCO around the world, different countries, and I was in Sierra Leone right after they had a war there. The war ended, and I was there teaching a screenwriting class, and I wound up meeting a gun runner who ran guns to the rebels. At the same time, I met a lot of child soldiers there, and it was very interesting. The kids were 14, 15 years old, and they were working in the diamond mines. They weren't going to school. I wanted to know their stories. I wanted to know the stories of the British gun runners who were there. And I wanted to know why they were in this country while I was there doing my job. So I came home and I wrote a screenplay about these type of people in a country like that after a war. And it's a story that one day we'll make, but it's one of those stories that you don't expect these people to be in the same place, depending on each other. And I love stories that kind of shock you out of your own situation and kind of flip stereotypes as much as possible.
There's a study that shows that the definition of popular is 2 words, not boring. And when you're talking about the unexpected, that's what I think makes for really interesting drama.
It's actually the only thing I want to watch these days is something that I haven't seen before. I can't watch the stuff I've seen before. It seems it fits into a pattern, and after a while you're like, okay, I've seen that, I know what's going to happen. I'm not saying I have to have a twist, but the setup has to be something that's really, really interesting and really different to keep my attention. There's so much to watch and so many films being made, so if you're going to sit down and write something and try to make it, it better be something that grabs you, and then you hope the audience is grabbed by it also.
Actors, what attracts you to a role besides, we're going to employ you?
That is my favorite thing.
I know for me, my favorite roles are ones where I get to challenge people's idea of who the villain is or who the bad guy is. I love giving degenerates souls so that people have to force themselves to deal with the fact that if they were in that circumstance, what would they do? And that became clear to me. I did in my repertory season for grad school at the drama school in New York. I worked on this character called Raoul from this play called Extremities. And for those who don't know, the Raoul is a rapist, and he ends up walking into this home, seemingly like he walked in the wrong house, and very quickly you find out that he's there for the woman that answered the door, and he's about to rape her, and then there's a small window of opportunity, and she takes advantage of it, and the rest of the play she's torturing him in the fireplace. So you know, it's easy to play a role like that and be the bad guy. But I really wanted to go as deep as I could, and through that, I got to explore and really heal some of my own trauma. So maybe that's another thing, is I love roles that allow me to use, you know, what I've gone through, or kind of to bring closure to elements of things that have happened to me in my life, so that I can learn new things. Like those are my favorite projects. I mean, yeah.
Lydia?
Well, I think that I started acting when I was really young, and one of the first plays that I directed and acted in was for the Catholic Youth Organization of the Diocese of Galveston, Houston, which I happened to be the president of when I was 16. But my early life was very much about spirituality and things like that. And so that was a story about a school that had burned down, and how the teachers and the nuns that worked at the school had tried to save the kids. And we did in competition. And we had nothing, like, I think we were doing the set with like some ladders that we got in the janitor's closet, and that was the building, and the kids would climb it. But it was working with the actors and the story that came across. So I don't know, I've gravitated over my years in working with a lot of community, like anybody who wants to tell a story, I'd like to help them tell a story. And I really only started acting full-time in the last 5 years of my life. So before that, getting an acting job on a movie or a TV was like a vacation, like a cool vacation where I got to do something fun. But most of my work was with the community. You know, I've worked with kids that are at risk. I've worked with, one of my last jobs in Houston was with a public health organization, and I worked with a PhD who used entertainment elements to strengthen public health messaging. So I was in charge of writing and producing and directing an interactive online telenovela with Hispanic families that would try to get them to behave more in a healthy way. And so I don't know, sometimes I feel like I'm not the one that's choosing, it's like the project that's choosing me, you know? So I just try to surrender to whatever comes my way. Now there are some roles, and I have said, like when I Get Shorty and Amara, I thought, oh, this is why nothing else worked out, because I had auditioned for several regulars in 3 or 4 different series at that point. But there's something about that particular role that allows me to express a dark side that I've lived on this earth. And yes, we're very nice, and that's by choice, because, you know, but there is something about that role that's like, oh, it's like putting on a bathrobe almost. It's like, oh, you don't have to pretend any niceties. You can just completely go with your gut and just do what works for you in that moment and not have to consider. I love the role very, very much. And I did feel like there was a blessing from my ancestors in a way when that whole audition happened, and the combination of the darkness and the humor. That's very much me. Like, I have a very twisted sense of humor, and yet I do all these like nonprofits, and I'm always helping the community and stuff. But I cuss like a sailor if you let me, and I have a dark side. And so I like roles that are darkly comic. I mean, maybe that's why I liked Scary Movie 5, and I like the intersection of comedy and drama. So those are the roles that I like the most.
Adam, do you choose your projects, or do they choose you?
I think it's a combination of things. It's not always one or the other. There have been some projects that I feel kind of came my way, and others I've actively pursued. And I have to agree with virtually everything I heard on the panel in terms of the criteria for what attracts me. Ultimately, it's wanting to be involved with stories that I would want to go see.
All right, we're gonna take a little turn because it is the 21st century and it's Hollywood. So let's talk about the D word, diversity.
Oh.
I hope you have all noticed that this is a very diverse panel, and it is what Hollywood should look like, but it doesn't always. Dwayne, what's it like to walk into a pitch meeting in Hollywood?
The same way it was early 90s, I guess. Well, you know, it's interesting. I got here like in maybe 93, 94, and you go to different studios, and invariably it's the same type of people, mostly very educated white guys, you know, and they're really smart guys. They know a lot about movies and history and politics. And it's great to talk about these things because if you're educated, if you have anything, if your script is good or if your film or TV show is good, you can talk about these things and it's a level playing field. But there are a lot of people of color from all over the world, women from everywhere. There's a guy on the south side of Chicago I know is really smart. He would love to work in Hollywood. There's people everywhere who look like me or anybody in this room who could be in those rooms. And I go now and I still see the same people. Mm-hmm. So I don't know what really has changed that much. I think maybe some things have been greenlit and some things are incrementally moving, but in the rooms, the buying rooms, the rooms where you go and see the people who will say yes or no on your projects, it's the same kind of people. And in order for things to change, you have to have other people who may look a little different, hearing your pitch or reading your script, or, I mean, good is good, so it doesn't really matter what you look like. It's really about, is it good or not? But the people buying, I think, should also change too. I believe it's important that we have people who are going to pull the trigger who are very, very different than just the same people over and over again.
Lydia, Goya, do you ever get called in to audition for characters that are not specifically designated as Latino?
I do. Yeah.
Sometimes. Sometimes. My auditions recently slowed down a bit because I specifically asked not to be submitted to like cholo roles anymore or like real street characters. Not because I can't do them, but because I don't know. It's just like it's like a narrative of depictions of characters in our community that I want to change that. Not that there's anything wrong with those roles, because I've played those roles already, and I've used them as a stepping stone to bring me to the point that I am now. But I just think we can get a lot more creative. There's a lot more dimension to the types of people in our community. But because of it, you know, it's a struggle to audition right now. So. Which is okay. It's part of the struggle, you know. But anyway.
I have 18 produced credits in network television, and on every show I was ever on, I was the girl. Literally, the girl. So when you all approach this from the writer-producer side and the writer-director side, I'm talking to you three fellows here, is there a conscious awareness now to have a spectrum of people from different ethnicities, different ages, and disability, which is the one that's always forgotten?
I mean, I'd say absolutely. I mean, I was raised by a single mother, and you know, kind of a socioeconomically, I went to public school so I'm very conscious of both the treatment of women and the lack of sometimes socioeconomic diversity in things. I'm always attracted to stuff that kind of tells the street level story as opposed to the rich people in their houses story. But we just did a writer's room for a project we're doing set in the Ottoman Empire in the 1600s, and it's set in and around a harem. So we were very conscious of it. We hired an entirely female writer's room, and me and my writing partner were the only guys in the room, and we were very conscious of the fact that we needed female voices to surround ourselves completely with female voices. And I think it's pretty rare to have an all-female room, but they were amazing, and they really kind of it was such an amazing experience that I don't know if I'm going to hire guys anymore. So, no, I'm joking. I'm kidding. But yeah, the more you're definitely conscious of it. No, I'm totally joking. You're definitely conscious of it, and I think it's a great thing that needs to continue and happen more. So.
Yeah. What about you?
Yeah, there is an effort to be conscious of that. In virtually all roles, we try to keep roles open to all ethnicities, and very often if there's a kind of toss-up between two auditions where there's a chance to go with someone of an ethnicity that you don't see as often, we make an effort to do that. We've made efforts to hire female directors. I think there's always more to be done, but I can say I feel like I'm aware of a shift in the past few years of an effort to be more conscious of that and extend more opportunity to people that have been traditionally a little left in the lurch.
Dwayne, you told me an interesting story about Will Smith.
Oh,
Please share.
we were talking about that movie.
Yeah.
Yeah, we were talking about this movie Hitch he made a few years ago. Hitch,
A brilliant film.
brilliant film. Were you never? Oh man, a brilliant film. But they asked him about the female lead and why they didn't have an African American female lead in the film. He said, "Well, we have to sell this film around the world, and we have to split the difference by getting Eva Mendes as the lead because black women didn't sell internationally to the bankers and to the sellers and the salespeople for this film with Will Smith around the world. And so they just couldn't have a black woman be his co-lead." I said, "Oh, wow, that's interesting." So if you go to AFM or you see all these films they have out there, it's very few will have a male, female, black, or maybe two Latinos or two Asians. You know, it's like the romantic comedy thing has to be juxtaposed with what sells. So he was very clear. He said, "I couldn't have a black woman to be my co-lead in this film because I wouldn't get the sale I wanted."
The one that really worked, I think it was State of Play with Will Smith and Regina King and Lisa Bonet. And all three members of the romantic triangle were African American. And I think that if you do more of it, just in general, throwing it out to those of you who write, you're going to get more of it eventually on screen. So since...
Well, I think they have to, people have to get used to that there are all types of people around who buy tickets.
Yeah.
You know, just get used to it. And the European buyers, over time, get used to the fact that America's diverse. And every country's diverse. Well, some countries are not, but they can accept diverse, shows and movies.
So let's play futurist, because there's a couple of those floating around this conference. What is entertainment going to look like in a post-streaming world? Now that everything is moving into online, CBS has its own streaming platform, NBC was bought by Comcast, Warner Brothers by AT&T. Where are things going to go in the next 5 to 10 years, do you think?
I'm wondering if shows are going to be more interactive because the online platform allows you to have that. A lot of shows already have like little side shows and little things that you can go online to watch to find out more about this character or that character. I think some people are experimenting with that, letting audiences have input on in what direction the show goes. I wonder if in the future it'll be more interactive.
Don?
Yeah, I think things are going to become more international. You know, there's a lot more co-productions that are being originated in like France and coming this way and vice versa. And I just think it's going to be more global. There's going to be more global entertainment. I mean, look, more buyers is always a good thing for creatives. So that's always great. But I definitely think it's going to be more of a global where there's diversity in parts where you're having an international cast in a way that's sort of organic and I think that's sort of a trend I see that's good, that's coming to.
That would be fun.
Adam?
I don't consider myself an expert on what the coming trends are. When I hear a 10-year projection at this point, I think of, Albert Einstein was asked what weapons he thought would be used in the next World War, if there ever were to be one. And he said, I don't know what weapons they'll be using in the next World War, but the weapons they'll be using in the war after that will be bows and arrows. And, and I just hope we're not all sitting around like, you know, a fire in the desert, you know, drawing pictures with sticks. 10 years right now seems like such a precarious amount of time. So I hope we're all around to enjoy the breakthroughs in technology.
When you think about it, the iPhone just turned 10. So we feel like it's been there forever. Dwayne?
Hopefully, we'll have the coastlines to live. You know, Los Angeles may be in Colorado, and New York may be in Chicago, and Shanghai would definitely be, you know, in Kazakhstan. I mean, the water is rising, so 10, 20 years from now, I don't know if we're going to be watching TV.
But we'll keep you all entertained while that's happening.
Oh my God. The most depressing panel ever.
Okay, so we're going to open it up to questions. If you've been in my panels before, you know that if you start to do anything that sounds like a pitch, I will go 0 to bitch in 6 seconds and stop you. So please don't put us in that situation. Who would like to ask a question?
That's funny.
Nobody?
Is there a microphone?
There-
Oh, there's a
No, there's not a
hand
mic.
right
Just
there.
stand up and yell.
Yeah. No, he wasn't recast. That was always intended to be a one-off. Yeah.
He wasn't Ray's father, though.
No,
wasn't Ray's
and he was
father.
not Ray's father. He was an old line producer that Ray was trying to get to come out of retirement. And then Peter Bogdanovich came on in the role of his father, but two different parts, always intended to be so. Yeah. And that was the first time I'd ever gotten to direct him. I'd acted with him and been directed by him, but I had never directed him before, so that was fun. Yeah.
Anyone else? Yes.
I'd like to ask what the best advice you can give about differentiating yourself in auditions or acting.
I don't want to
Differentiate.
monopolize the answers.
I mean, just be really fucking good. I mean, that's the way to do it. I mean, just be so good that it's unstoppable. You know, I mean, that's what I would say. I mean, just
That was Steve Martin's advice. Be so good they can't ignore you.
Yeah.
I don't know. One thing that I try to tell people is like, don't go with your first instinct or your second instinct or your third instinct. Like, really sit with the script until there's an interpretation that just makes you go, oh, or I could do it. You know, there's ways that most people will approach it, and if you just go for that interpretation, you're going to be like most people. But if you can really dig and dig and dig until you find a different way of looking at it that you wouldn't have thought of originally, that surprises you, that's something that I look for. And then I'm like, oh, yeah, you know, something that just spending enough time with it, I guess, to come up with something that even surprises you.
Well, I'll also say, for me, it really changed, like auditioning really changed when I stopped giving a shit about trying to fill an idea of what I think they're looking for.
Yeah, not giving
Yeah.
a shit, that's very good.
Yeah, it's like, because you know,
Definitely
like,
don't
yeah,
give a shit.
don't give a shit.
It'll ruin you. It'll ruin you.
Yeah, I've kind of, worse than being bad for me is mediocre. Like going on in and not being memorable. You know, like, all right, like, yeah, I did all right. Well, I did not get out the park, or even like if I did bad, at least I know I went in there and fucking went balls to the
They
wall.
will
You know?
remember you.
Yeah, they're gonna remember me. But there's so many times where I was like mediocre because I was trying to get the job. That's what it was. I was
Yeah.
too busy consuming myself with getting the job, but that's not my job. My job isn't to get the job. The job is, I have, you know, you have no control of whether they're going to give you the job. The only thing that you have control over is the experience of you
Yeah.
that you can give them, and that's it.
Yeah. Well,
So-
and that's something that I think it took, you know, like you don't go in there to, you don't approach it to figure out what they want. You approach it to figure out what you would do with it. This is your material now. You've got the part. Sometimes I think of an audition as a very short performance piece, you know, like I'm going in there to perform for you and I'm going to entertain you, but I'm not, you know, asking your opinion. I mean, yes, you try to interpret, but, and I got some advice that I thought helped, because they said, you know, if you fully embody the role and you show up and you really do what you would do with it and you filter it through you and you and you, then at least we know you. And if you're not right for that part, but we can think about you for another part because we saw you. But if you just show up only trying to guess what they want to see and you're really not really fully present and you're kind of just, you know, then they really didn't meet you. You know, they really didn't see you. So the way they said it was more lucid than the way I just said it, but it kind of got to me in that moment of like, yeah, that's really the most important thing, is just to really show up and just be me there so they can meet me and find the right role for me. But if I don't show up, if I'm constantly hiding behind, oh, do you like me? Don't you like me? You know, then they don't really get to see me. And it worked.
I'm not an actor, but I want to add something to that, because coming from New York City, the one thing I noticed that's different from anything I've seen out here, I was working in Rockefeller Center, and sometimes on nice days I'd walk over to Broadway and kind of just stroll around on lunch hour. And almost every single day I would see an actor shout out to another one, hey, they're interviewing over at the Morosco, you should go try out. I don't see that kind of camaraderie and sharing. But every time that I've been in a pitch session as a writer that I've been tapped out, if I say, no, I know a writer that has them, let me have them call you, suddenly that changes everything in the room. And I wish that was something that would happen in Hollywood more often. That actors would go, yeah, I just tried out for this part, it's really better for you, you should go get in.
I do that.
Yeah, I do that
Who you
too.
do?
Yeah.
Like what my friends.
I've done that throughout my entire career. And if I ever have to turn down a role or if I'm not available for something, I usually try to find somebody that can replace me, because that might be their start. You know, like something that I can't do is actually where someone else's beginning could be to get an entry into the career. So I don't know, we're very communitarian about that. We have little groups of actors that we collaborate with and do projects with, and so at least in my life it is that way.
I have not seen that happen before. I've seen this kind of like, no, I had this great audition. No, I can't tell you about it.
Everybody's in their car here, though.
Yeah, you'd have to
on the
honk at
street.
people and roll down your window and go, hey, there's oh, sorry.
Shout it out.
I would love to add one thing to the question of differentiating yourself, and it piggybacks on what's already been said, but don't go into auditions assuming that everybody in the room knows exactly what this part is. They're
Yeah.
very often waiting for you to define it. And there isn't one person making that decision. So if you go in with a strong choice and something that does reveal your perspective on something, you can often be the person that's defining what they're looking for. And the other thing I'd say, and this is after the fact, when you don't get the job, as an actor, and now sitting on the other side of the audition process, there's a tendency to beat the crap out of yourself when you didn't do the level of work that you did in your living room. You wanted to be that free and that good when you got in the room, and you feel that you missed it. The increment of difference between your best work and what you did in the room generally is not the reason you don't get a part. You know, if you do 90% of what you did in your living room and you're beating yourself up because it wasn't that 100%, generally that's not why you're not getting a role. There are so many factors that go into casting a part. Oftentimes it's who's been cast opposite you. Oftentimes there are diversity questions that come into play. You know, there's no way to know. So the second that you haven't gotten a role, brush it off, tell yourself that was not my part. and be ready for the next opportunity, because that inner dialogue that beats the crap out of yourself for stuff it's useless.
That's amazing advice.
Yeah.
The fellow in the back.
Yeah, I wanted to know if you guys are actors and producers and you work in sort of linear television, so it seems like a lot of you from like film, TV perspective. How has the digital, we had a digital conference and streaming affected what you pitch, how you pitch? Do you do branded stuff? Do you do a streaming, short form? You know, how has it affected the way that you produce and compose your craft?
I mean, I think, you know, there's obviously, you know, for someone, I came from the feature world, so all the great drama kind of migrated to TV, and the streamers, I think, are doing stuff that's more like the TV dramas as opposed to what was on network before that. So I think there's just a lot more demands for a lot of different types of content. So as far as the digital, again, more buyers is always a good thing for creatives. I mean, I think the consolidation might change that. I mean, they're all becoming kind of one company, but there is this sort of ravenous beast to feed. And I think the great thing about it is, like, there is, if you have a kids show, there's a place to sell kids shows, adult animation, whatever it is. There's a lot more homes for it than, you know, there was even 5-10 years ago. So
I was just looking at a show called High Maintenance, which is on HBO now. And I remember seeing it 2 years ago on Vimeo, and it was 5 minutes or 10-minute pieces, and they did 15 of these short form video pieces, and then it got to the point where the stories were so interesting, and they just were really, HBO said, let's do a series. Now it's on HBO as a series, a half an hour. So anything could migrate toward the larger companies, but it could start as a digital piece, and I've seen things cross over like that. So it's almost like the proving ground right now, for people who want to maybe pay you money for something bigger.
Okay, on that note, thank you all for coming. Please give a round of appreciation to our panel. And we will be back here in the spring. Please join us again.